Welcome back to Vectorworks 2013. This is the Design second year course, and this is episode 3A with James Russell. So today we're going to do a rather big lesson on presentation styles. We're going to talk about layers, particularly the difference between design layers and sheet layers. We're going to have a discussion about the screen plane and the layer plane, and also automatic planing, and a few other fun things like that. It's mainly how to take the concepts that you've learnt from the last two lessons and bring them out so you can get them ready to put onto sheets of paper or print them as PDFs, send them to people, that kind of thing. So, what you've been living in at the moment is this kind of infinite 3D world, and this is known as the design layers. So you can see here I can zoom out as far as I want, the numbers just keep going, and I can also zoom in as far as I want. In terms of restrictions here, we're not really restricted at all. We can do anything we want, work in any scale we like, we can jump through objects as far as we want. So this space here, as I like to think of it, is infinite, and that's how you should really think of the design layers. It's for putting your design down onto a layer, no matter what scale, no matter what size. Up here I'm going to click the layers button, and in case you haven't seen episode 2B, the solutions video, this drop down here shows our current layers. So you can see I've only got one design layer here, and next to it is the layers button. I'm going to click that and it'll bring up the organization panel. This is what this is here. So you'll notice a few different tabs along the top. We're going to start with design layers, we'll jump back into classes, and then we'll work our way forwards. So design layers. What we've got here, you've probably worked on so far, is just design layer 1, and you can see it tells me a bit of information about design layer 1. In here we've got visibility, 3 columns, visible, invisible, and grey. So it tells us that that's currently visible. This tick here shows it's also the active layer, which means it's what we're working on right now. It's got a name, it's got an order, which we'll talk about soon. Scale, stories are irrelevant except if you're using buildings really. Level type, elevation, all that kind of thing. Colors, opacity, so is it see-through, and then some render kind of stuff on the end here. Straight off here I'm going to click new. And this is the new dialog here. You can see it basically gives us two options here. We can either create a new layer with this name, in this case design layer 2, or we can import a design layer. We can either take them from file, we can take them from templates, depending on what we're using. And there's a checkbox down here, edit properties after creation. So I'm going to check this just temporarily to show you what the extra options you can have for a layer are. So hit OK, and we get this. This is the options for our new design layer. You can see it's got the name up here, scale, so you click the scale button here and it brings up all the imperial scales, all the metric scales, so your standard ones, you know, your 1 to 25, your 1 to 50, 1 to 100. You can do a custom scale here as a paper scale, or you can do by enlargement, so if you want something that's 5 times as big as a real object, 10 times, etc. So you just hit OK when you've got one that I like. Now, design layers, this is a big thing that I often have a discussion about, and that's what scale a design layer should be. I realistically believe that you should only ever have a 1-to-1 design layer, because it's stupid that you should have to think about scaling something up or down from a kilometer down to a something. You know, you should just be able to draw something that's a kilometer as a kilometer, and that's it. And when you come to later on putting it onto a paper, that's when your scaling should be applied. Other people may vary in that view, but for me 1-to-1's always the way I go in design layers. Stacking order is basically in terms of depth for 2D principles and also selection criteria. So if something has a stacking order of 1, as you can see here, this design layer is on top, it's number 1, which means if there's a square here and a square underneath it, I'm going to click on design layer 2 first because it has the highest stacking order. It's basically what's on top in terms of selection and what's in top in terms of the 2D world sometimes as well. Stories, it's only really relevant to buildings, but you can set a new story up, which means that, say you're working on a building that has 44 floors, you could have 44 design layers or 100 design layers and specify a floor. And with that floor will come a starting elevation as well. So if you say you're on floor 44, it might have an elevation of, I don't know, 100 meters or something like that. And so therefore you can just drop that down, click on floor 44, and automatically Vectorworks would know that your starting point is 100 meters off the ground, let's say. Layer wall height, that's just the default inside there, and the level type as well. There's a couple of different things here that you can choose from. It's mainly to do with buildings, which we'll try and discuss in lesson 5 or lesson 6. Opacity, as I said, that's how transparent it is. So at the moment 100% means that we see 100% of the objects. At 50% we can see through halfway, and obviously 0 they're completely clear, which would make it irrelevant. You may as well be using the invisible button. Renderworks background, we can talk about this later on, but it's basically, there's a couple in here, some high resolution, blue sky backgrounds, nighttime backgrounds, cloudy backgrounds, that kind of thing. So when you get to rendering, you can have a play with those. And then there's some other buttons here which we'll come to discuss later on. So hitting OK, you can see there are my two design layers. I can toggle invisible, grey, visible, etc. And I can also change the stacking order here. Just when you're aware of that, if I just want to move this down, you can't actually drag it from here. You have to do it within this column, which is called stacking order. So I could grab design layer 1 and put that up on top there by clicking and dragging. So that's pretty straightforward. I'll just show you here. So if I've got design layer 1 checked, go back here, draw a couple of objects. I'm just going to draw some rectangles in here. There we go, that's pretty good. I can then jump up here and go to design layer 2. You can see they automatically get grayed out there. And I can do this, draw a couple more rectangles. And now I've got objects on both my design layers. Now you notice as I toggle between, they're graying automatically. So up here under our view menu, there's a layers options, and you'll see there's class options as well. So just be noting that what I'm going to say about layers applies to classes as well, and we'll discuss what classes are in a second. So you can see here, you can have all these different options as well as the visibility within this organization panel here, these three here. You can have other factors involved. So if you're noticing that things are graying automatically, it's probably in here, and you can see, so this is layer options. My active layer will always appear here as these objects are. But here you can see I've got my additional layers set to grey/snap others, which means they're greyed out, but I can still snap to their points. Looking at a few different options here, you could have show others, which means they're shown and I'll snap to them. Oh, actually I won't snap to them, they're just shown. From here I can go show snap others, which means I'll get all these points back. So if you want to see everything as it is underneath, that's what you probably want, and that's where you'll live most of the time. And then you can also have show snap modify others, which means the layers become semi-irrelevant because I can pick up anything on any layer that I like and move them around. That's pretty much it there. You can do active only if you want to see nothing. That would be handy for the 3D task at the end of last lesson, where you wouldn't have to set your visibility to invisible and jump between them, but that's up to you. Often that'll stump people as well, so just leave that on. I'm going to put it on show snap others for now. Now we're going to jump back a section. So design layers is a great way obviously to distinguish between objects. So for example, let's just say, and I'm going to jump here onto design layer 2 and do some renaming, that we're going to call design layer 1 floor. There we go. And we're going to call design layer 2 walls, just to get a distinction going there. So I'm on the walls layer at the moment, and I'm going to just draw with boxes a little basic object. Just a few walls. This is not how you draw walls, by the way. We'll talk about walls later on, but I'm just drawing this for this current demonstration. There we go, that's my little box that I've built there. And I'm in fact even just going to extrude those briefly out to, what's our current height? 500? About 130, let's call it that. So there you go. You can see I've got some little walls there. Then I'm going to jump onto my floor layer here, and I'm going to put a floor in as well. Across to here. Snap in down to here. Extrude that to 10 millimeters. Oh, let's just call it 5 millimeters. So there you go. You can see I've got two layers now. They're acting as one, and I've got them all here. Now moving objects between layers, the easiest way to do it, say this floor all of a sudden had to move, you can see over here in your right hand side, layer, and it's on floor at the moment. Just check walls and it will move across. I can no longer select it because I'm on the floor layer, and obviously if I went back to walls, I could shuffle that back to where it belongs on the floor layer. So within each of these, obviously I've distinguished two different separate groups there of walls and floors as a general category. But what if I want to break it down even further and keep things within that? So for example, on my walls here, I might like to put a painting in. I'm going to just swap this to automatic and put this in here. Give that a little bit of an extrude as well. 5, that sounds pretty good. So in terms of my walls, I'd like my walls to be one type of thing and this to be another type. And you only really want to start playing with classes if you really need to break things down, such as if you're doing a lighting design, for example, for the interior of a house, and you've got a whole heap of fixtures that you'd like to generalize or color in different ways, but you don't want to have to keep selecting each of the objects every single time. What you can do is use a thing called classes, and classes is just a big generalization. By default, you'll be on none, which is basically, that's how I live most of the time until I need to actually use classes. So we're going to click this button here, which is the classes menu, and you'll notice it's just one tab across in the organization menu. So you can see I end up with two here by default, none and dimension. And you have to think of these as a set of defaults, essentially. I'm going to make a new default now for my walls. I'm going to call this the walls default, and I might just to delineate here, make it a class. So I'll just put a dash class in there, which will put it as a subcategory, but it's just so I can distinguish between my layer of walls and my walls class. I'm going to edit the properties once again after creation, and click OK. So what I'm now presented with is this, the Edit Classes menu. And you've got a couple of options here. You can use it creation, and then you've got also some fill and pen styles, and opacity, and then some stuff relating to actual building stuff, such as walls conveniently as what we're using, but that's okay. So up here you can either use a creation, which means anytime you're on this class, any objects that is created will use these properties. I'm going to check it for this operation. And a fill style here is solid, so basically fill means what color is it in the interior, so inside of the pen. So a solid, and let's just make this, for this example, a nice red. There we go. And a pen style over here, I'm just going to exaggerate this and make it a 1 point thickness there, and you can see it's a solid style at the moment. You can also use these, but we'll talk about textures when we get there. So essentially I've just made this class here say that anytime I'm on the walls class and I make something, I want it to have a fill of red and a pen style of black and a thickness of 1. In here, okay, you can see there it is there, and because I put that dash in there, it's actually made it a subcategory of walls there. So the dash essentially means that you're breaking something down even further. So within the class, you're also breaking something further and further down. So I could have walls, and then I could have brick walls, granite walls, I don't know, whatever, paved walls, some sort of texture or rendered walls, all within there, and it would come under this subcategory of walls. So I'm going to make that my active class by clicking here. I could have also done that from the drop down menu up over here, drop this down, walls, and click on class, and it'd become active. So now hopefully anything that I draw, seeing as I've got this walls class active, should have a pen color, a color of red and a pen thickness of 1 in a black line. You can see it's happened now. If I jump back to my none though, the preferences for my none, as previously stated, were black and white, which is what we've been using, pen thickness of 0.5. So you can see it's really good if I all of a sudden go, need to draw some more walls, jump on my wall class, and I don't have to change any of my previous preferences, I can just start drawing these. So what else is this good for? Well, the other good thing is if all of a sudden you've done a massive design, you've laid out all these beautiful walls that have got paintings and wallpaper and all this other thing, and a designer comes along to you and goes, actually I really don't like that wallpaper, can you make it a blue wallpaper with this? That's really easily done. As opposed to having to go through and select every single one of these objects that I've just made, I can just go to my walls class, and because all of these are using this by default, as you can see here, the little arrow says color by class up here. It's class style as well, so that's all selected there, but we drew these so we know they're following the class style. By going back to here, I could say jump into here, change the fill to my lovely blue, which my designer has chosen, hit OK, and all of these have changed. So it's really good that you can just go through, change all of that, change it again, which is inevitably how you want to draft, is not only thinking about what's going to make it easiest for me now, but what's going to make it easiest for me in the future. So just think of classes as an additional breakdown within your layers. So you've got layers, and then within that you've got classes. And classes can spread across layers, obviously. The walls are always going to be the same in a skyscraper, for example. So you can have a class for all your walls, all of this type, and they can span across those multiple layers. They're both relevant to each other. Hopefully you'll get to use them at some point in time. Now if you've watched the solution video 2B, you'll have obviously already seen how we discussed layer plane and screen plane. I'm going to run through it again because it's quite an important principle, especially if you come from a 2011 background and you're moving into the 2012-2013 kind of realm. going to get rid of all the stuff that we've done here so far. Also going to jump on my floor layer and get rid of that. So here I'm just going to draw an example, and I'm on my walls class at the moment, which I'm just going to jump off that and go back to none, where we're safely from before. So there's a box. I'm going to extrude that out, make it, I don't know, 400. So there's my box there, and in this side view here, I'm also going to just cut a taper into it, so we can do a bit of this, extrude that out to, I don't know, overshoot a little bit, like we've been talking about. That's at 800. Drag this back into here, and I'm going to clip both those away, so subtract from there. You can see I end up with this shape here. This is what I'm going to use to demonstrate our plane options here. So we were talking about rectangles and how you approach drawing the objects at the end of last episode. They're 30 odd kind of challenge objects. And it comes in here when you're trying to draw things in both isometric and side, front, left, right kind of views. And it's how Vectorworks approaches where you're going to put a 2D object in the 3D world. So I've clicked on this and I'm in an isometric view. You can see this is chosen automatic, and it's probably what will happen on your computer as well. And what that means is it's going to start drawing on the plane that I hover over. So you can see here as I approach this angled surface, it's highlighted in blue, and this end, and this top, and this front. I'm going to just draw a couple of rectangles now. So you can see on this flat surface here, if I draw one, it's going to end up like that. You can see how it's adapted to this plane here, and it's applied it on there. Similarly, if I chose this top, it would do something like that. And if I chose this angled surface, it would end up like that. And as you go through, and you can either push-pull these as well, you'll see it'll pop in or out from that surface, coming off where we drew it. Okay? So that's option 1. That's automatic that we were just using then, and it's adapting to these objects. It's very much a SketchUp kind of style of drawing. But that's not applicable in all circumstances. Sometimes you don't actually want that to happen. You'd like to either draw on the ground plane, or you'd like to draw in the applicable view that you're currently in. So the second option here is layer plane. And you can see here the layer running through here. We've got our x-axis running across here in red, and our y-axis running up and down here in the green, and obviously z up and down in the blue, represented by this kind of blue rectangle here on the ground. So if I now am on layer plane and I start drawing, it draws it relative to the plane. Okay, see how it's sticking to that x and y as though we were viewing it from the bird's eye view down. So it's looking as if it's here. I'm going to go into my plan view. You can see those rectangles have been drawn here. It's as if I was drawing it just like this in our plan view. I'll just draw another one side by side that. There it is there. So it sticks to the layer plane. It has no 3D properties. It's 3D in Vectorworks' mind, but it's stuck on the plane. It's still a 2D rectangle in terms of that. And obviously we can elevate up from there upwards using either that, or we can use our extrude options, as I'm going to show you here. Going to extrude that and choose a height of 100, and there we go. Okay. Now the third option, which is how drafting in Vectorworks has been done from about 2010 backwards, is using the screen plane. We didn't have the layer plane as such until 2009, 2010, and definitely before that it was all very much screen plane based. And the screen plane is a little bit difficult to describe, but the way I like to think of it is as though it's a bug on your windshield. And I'll show you that now. So here, I've got screen plane selected. I'm going to draw something here. Now Vectorworks has disregarded any association to the layer plane, any association to the objects, and it's just drawing in accordance to your rulers here. So I've just drawn that, a 310 by 331 rectangle. But what you'll notice as I fly around this object is that it's actually stuck on our windshield. It's overlapping all the objects because this 2D object doesn't have a home here in this 3D world yet. It's just here on our 2D world, which is our rulers at the moment. You can see they aren't moving to match the 3D object either. So what this means is that if I extrude this object from here, it extrudes in the view that we're looking at currently outwards towards us. I'm going to do that now, give that an extrusion of 500, and you'll see as I rotate around now, it's actually been extruded in the orientation that we were looking at. Okay, now this can be quite handy. I'll show you. If we're in this right hand view here, as opposed to having to deal with the automatic view of trying to select this here, I can just draw a rectangle and then extrude it, making sure I'm on screen plane, 300 or so, and then I know that that's just come out from the axes here in the center, and if I have a flyover, you'll see it's come out in our current orientation. It's come straight out towards us, and you can see there it is there, coming out from this axis here. So it just comes out from whichever direction you're viewing it from. So hopefully that clears things up for you. Feel free to ask if you need another example, if you want some exercises to do on this. But that's the three differences. The automatic, which is very much SketchUp style. The layer plane option, which is basically on the XY layer, same as we're looking at now, the top-down view, drawing on there and then elevating upwards. And then screen plane, which adapts to the current view that you have as a user. So we briefly touched on it before, but I'm going to talk about the attributes panel, which is this one down here. If you don't have it open at the moment, just under your window, palettes, and you'll find it here, attributes. Control Shift A apparently for me. I presume it's going to be Apple Shift A for anyone on a Mac. I'm going to draw one singular box here. There we go. And one singular line as well. So if you have a look at the properties that's come up with each of these, we've got one line here. It has no fill because it's not a shape, I guess you'd call it. And it's also got a pen styling, opacity, pen thickness, and some arrowheads on here. So if I zoom in on this, and I'd like to change the color, I simply click inside this currently black box. I've got some colors that I've used previously in this drawing, or I can choose something from the color wheel. Let's say a nice hot pink. There we go. And you can see that's changed to that pink there. I can't really see it, so I'm going to make it a bit thicker. Line thickness here. You can choose from these, or you can put in your own under set thickness straight in there. I'm going to choose this quite thick 1.4. That's a bit nicer there. Opacity, is it see-through? I'll show you that in a sec on here. And also tails on this. So you can see here this currently just kind of rounds out a little bit. I'm going to put this end marker on here, and you should be able to see. Might be a bit hidden by the thickness of this line, I think. Oh, I've got the line selected now. There we go. You can see it's got an arrowhead now for sure. You can drop down this little other little arrow next to here and choose a different styling if you wanted a different type on the end there. You can import your own as well. So here's the marker list. Make some new ones, edit some, delete some, whatever you need to do. It will look small in this here because we're not in a sheet layer, which we're coming to discuss in a sec. Just hang on, we'll get there. I'm just going to select our rectangle and have a look at some other options that we've got going on for us. So in terms of filling, there's a couple of different options here. We've got solid, pattern, hatching, tiling, gradients, images, and class style. So working from here, class style, that means it'll reference the class that it's currently in. In our case over here it's none, so it's probably going to be exactly the same. Solid, we'll have a look at some of the color options here. So you've got these, you've got some classic Vectorworks colors, which are just kind of a standard layout of colors. Your standard, just monotone colors, working our way through from the lights to the darks. You've also got some palettes up here. So all these different things, such as Dulux, so if you want to use a common paint brand there, you've got some Pantone colors and all this kind of thing. Roscoe in here as well. So you've got your scenic paint colors, if you need any of those, they're all within there. There's a couple other brands as well, some spotlight colors. So there's your Roscoe and your Lee series as well, for those of you doing lighting stuff. So that's good to know that they're all there, and you can of course use the color picker as well, so typing in a value, choosing a color, whatever you need. You can make that a nice lime green in there. Just have a look at some patterns as well. So you've just got this kind of pattern option. It's very much like, you know, Microsoft Paint mid 1995. What else we got here? Got some hatching, which is a little bit more advanced. It's relating to some more of the building kind of stuff. So your concrete hatching, your wall hatching, earth and dirt kind of stuff inside here. You can adjust all of those by clicking on the little hatch settings on the side and make your own. Got some tiles as well. So just within here you can see it's some various colors. Obviously, once again, make your own. It's a nice weave pattern inside there. And then you can also use gradient. That's just simple Photoshop kind of deal. And importing images. Now, this is an interesting one because I normally discourage importing images straight onto a 2D object. It's okay if you're doing it in kind of a reference style, or if you want to use this as more of a layout kind of thing, doing flowcharts and that kind of stuff, if you choose to use Vectorworks in that way. But if you're actually drafting in 3D objects, it's better to use this as a texture, in my opinion. Try not to put an image on there. You just get more flexibility by using an image as a texture. And obviously we'll discuss that around episode 5 when we get into it. So I'm going to just pop that back on solid and probably get rid of those. And we are going to talk about sheet layers.
I take a sheet in the library to stay focused.
I take a sheet the first thing in the morning to wake up.
I take a sheet before a long ride.
I've taken a sheet ride in the cockpit.
Okay. So firstly, I'm just going to open up a document that I did. This is my document that contains all of our current objects that we've been making. So if I just run through them all here, you can see these are my current attempts at the puzzles that we've been doing. I'm going to use one of these as an example. Which one should I use? This one here is actually pretty good. Let's use this as an example. So I'm happy with this now, and I would like to take this from its current world here in the 3D design space, and I want to put it onto a sheet layer, which means I want to get it ready for printing, either sending out via PDF, exporting via email, or printing physically to paper. The first thing I need to do is decide which one of those I'm going to do, and it's just rough. You don't have to lock yourself in and be really committed, because you can obviously scale up and down from page sizes later on, but it's good to have an idea. So here I'm going to click on my layers button, and I'm going to go across here to sheet layers. And sheet layers, it looks very similar to design layers in terms of, number of columns and things like that. You can see there's only 2 here that are really relevant in my opinion for the time being. That's the sheet number and the sheet title. Let's have a look what happens when we click new.
I take a sheet in the pool.
I take a sheet right before I operate.
I take a sheet in the sand trap.
I take a sheet in the middle of the street.
Seriously, what actually happens? Oh, you get this, and you'll notice it's very similar to the design layers options. We've got either 2 checkpoints here. We can either choose to make a new sheet layer with a sheet number and a sheet title, or we can import a previous sheet layer from either a file or somewhere else on our computer. So I'm going to give this a sheet number. Sheet numbers are a very personal preference kind of thing. Some people like to do just a basic number, so for example a 001. Some people might like to follow that with like a -A or something like that. Some people do like a sheet 01-01, that might be referencing a type of sheet and then a version number or a revision or something like that. A lot of people like to make this, for example, A1 might be a building plan -01, so this might be the ground floor, and revision A on the end of that, or layout A, something like that. It's entirely up to you, and it's important that as you draft you find your own preferences. I normally use S01, just representing sheet 01-01 for my first drawing, or sometimes a 00 depending on what you're feeling. Normally I'll try and leave 00 available for an information page relating to that set of packages that I give out. And then a title, so I'm going to call this my final presentation. Of 3D. Let's call it that. I'm going to edit the properties as well after creation and click OK. So you can see all that information is already written in there. A stacking order of 1, which is kind of irrelevant in this particular case because each sheet is actually independent, and it should be sorting by the sheet numbers anyway. DPI stands for dots per inch, and it's basically a resolution. So how detailed is this page? 72 is fine for most printing. You'll notice it goes up to 150 and 300 depending on how high a quality print you're doing. So for example, at an A1 size, you probably want to start thinking about 150, and if you're getting really detailed, ramp it right up until you get to the 300 mark. Photos, they come out anywhere above the 300 mark right up to thousands, depending on what you're looking at in terms of the photo. So it's important to choose that. Just remember that relating to file size, the larger the DPI, the larger the file size. So obviously if we're sitting at 72 now and we go up to 150, we've doubled the amount of dots per inch, so therefore it's going to be double the file size in terms of that particular image. Also origin, you can have a custom origin if you like. I'm going to leave mine at 0 and 0, just means that point there is 0 and 0. And the important one you want to click is your page setup options here. So you can see the number of pages, 1 and 1, which means it's just one page that we're looking at, and you most commonly won't vary from that, I wouldn't imagine. In here it has to show the page boundary because we're working to a page. So it's unlike this infinite space that we've been in for the last little while, we are actually now looking at a physical page and how it's going to end up when it lands on that page. So we're going to show breaks and we're going to show watermarks if the document's watermarked as well. Now here I currently have an A4 printer selected, but I would prefer to be able to print this at say A3 or A1. So I'm going to check this box that says choose size unavailable in printer setup, and most of the time you probably either won't have a printer connected or it mightn't be the right size for you. So if I check this and drop this down, you can see here's all the standards, and I'm going to choose the ISO and I'm going to do this as an A3. You can also do printer setup in here, and there's my printer inside there as an A4 size. You can also choose your orientation. I'm going to choose landscape in this. Hit OK. So ISO 03 at landscape. OK, OK, and OK finally, and you'll end up with this. And you can see this is one page right here. Now what you'll notice, and I don't know if some of you can see it, but it's actually got a breakup running through here and running through here. And that's just showing if I was to print this A3 page on my current printer, it would take up 4 sheets because there's one A4, 2, 3, 4. But that's looking pretty good, so that's one A3 page. Now the next thing is how do we take something we've drawn in the design layer and bring it across into here. We use this funny thing called viewports. So I can't remember which one I chose. Did I choose? I think that's my one there. There it is. So I'm number 6, I've got to remember that. So we've got this here and I want to take it across. Well, you don't just copy and paste it, you need to give it a bit more information than that. So we're going to look at this in our plan view, and I'm going to grab this object here and I'm going to make a viewport of it. So we go from the view menu down here to create viewport. You'll notice there's a couple other options here, but I'm just going to use create viewport for now and we'll talk about these two later on. Create viewport and I get this, a lot of options. Don't be scared at this point in time, it's okay because anything you put in here can be changed later just by the click of a button. So viewport name, quite important. I'm going to call this, what am I on? Design layer 6, so I'm going to call this 3D-6 or 06, and this is top. And I'm actually going to copy that because I would like that to also be my drawing title. The drawing title is a new little feature there. If you put a label on this and it's got a drawing title, it'll automatically fill in that label for you with all that information, so that's kind of handy. Create on layer, and you can see it's automatically chosen my sheet layer as the preference there for that layer, which is where I want it as well. We've got the layers button here, and you can see I can check on or off layers. So if all of a sudden I wanted to also see layer 9 in this viewport that I'm making, I could check that on or check that off. Once again, can be changed later on. Same thing with classes, and then scale. I'm going to leave this at 1 to 1. I'm going to change it after, just so you see where I'm heading with this. It tells me some more. I can put a custom scale if I chose one. What view it's currently in, top plan. What rendering it's got, which we'll obviously talk about in lesson 5. And our projection and stuff like that, which we'll get onto. If I just hit OK, you'll notice it's taken this. It's kind of put it in a viewport, and it's plunked it right here on my page. So this object, if I remember correctly, it was probably about 50mm wide and 70mm high. And what you'll notice is it's put it in here, and it's actually that size on the page because it's 1 to 1. So that's the size, if I was to make that object here, that's the size it would end up on a page. In real scale, that's how it would look on an A3 page. Now, I might like to make that a little bit bigger, and I think I will because it's a little bit small. So dropping down the scale options here, I can either go down in scale, so if I went 1 to 2, it's going to be half as big as real scale. 1 into 2, 50%. So you can see, by clicking that, it's half the size. If I went again to 1 into 4, it's a quarter of the size. And you can go all the way down here, and conversely we've got times as well. So 2 times as big, 3 times as big, 10 times as big. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to choose 2 times, and you can obviously, up the top here, use a custom scale as well if you'd like to do that. So that's looking pretty good. The other thing you'll notice is I can snap into this, but if there were separate objects in here, they all act as one. It's as though they're a big group. What if I want to go change something inside here? Pretty easy. You just double click on this, and you can either choose one of these 3 options. We're going to discuss annotations and crop in a second, but you can just jump straight to the design layer that's currently shown. Design layer 6, hit OK, and it'll take you inside there. Before I go into cropping in annotations though, I need some other bits of information going on here. I'd like a couple of other views. So I'm going to show you one way of doing it, and then I'm going to show you another way of doing it. If I go back to layer 6 here, there's my object. I'd really like a side view of this. So I'm going to press my 6 key, and I'm going to get a view here. Now this is actually the front because my object's a bit funny in this way. I'm going to fix that up now by grabbing this and rotating it left. That makes more sense to me, that the side is that and the front is that. Everyone okay with that? Good, we'll move on. So that's my top now, and you'll notice that change that I've made there should have been reflected right here. Okay, it's a live living update of that object. Any changes I make are made here. It's like a photo that's constantly updating itself. So if I look here in this right hand view, I'm just going to take another snapshot of it with my create viewport. I can put the details back in again, so because I've still got it on copy and paste, I'm just going to paste that back in there and call this right. Paste that in there and call it right as well. It knows my layer, knows all these details. Now I know that I used a scale of 2 times before, so I'm going to preset that up here and hit OK. So that's looking pretty good. There's one component missing that I'm going to put in now. Now another one to save time, as opposed to having to go back in, take another shot of it, come back out, see if it's right, that kind of thing. I'm just going to copy this. So Control C, I'm just going to paste as well, paste there. And what I'm going to do is choose from my drop down here a view of front. You can see it's instantly swapped that over, and this is becoming our kind of isometric view. I'm going to pop that up there, making sure I get my snaps aligned. Grab that corner, line it up to here. It's looking good. And get this snap happening up here, somewhere there. So now we've got a top, a front, and a side view of this. That's going alright. I'm pretty happy with how that's going. Let's put one more in here, an isometric. So once again, just going to copy this. This time I'll use a click and drag. And just so we know what we're looking at, let's do a left isometric. And that's a bit too big, so I'm going to put that back down to a 1x scale. It's a little bit too small. Looks like I'm going to have to use a custom scale. And in here I'm just going to make it, what do I want, 0.75. So you can see that's halfway between 1.5, and I'm just going to move that down a fraction. So there's our three standard viewports and an isometric there as well, and that's looking rather nice. Let's talk about what else we can do to this. So let's say that we would like to put some labels on this. How are we going to go about that? I'm going to double click on the top view here and choose the annotations layer. Okay, annotations is basically anything that goes on top of this viewport. Now remember that each viewport is independent unless you've copied and linked them together, of course, but think of them as independent. So the scribbles that I make on here aren't affecting the drawing underneath, it's only affecting this. It's like if I give you 2 or 3 different photos of the same photo that I've printed and you write your name on the front of it. It's just on that photo, it's not affecting any of the others. Whereas if I change the content of the photo and then hand them out, it will have changed. So in here I'm going to do a couple of different things, and to do this we're going to need our dimensions panel. It's down here with a ruler and a pencil. Yours might have it written as well as dimensions and notes. So I'm going to try and expand this out a little bit so we can read all of these things going on. There we go. Now a lot of these will seem unfamiliar to you, and that's okay. There's only really 3 or 4 of them that I want to discuss now, and we'll leave the rest for later. The main ones are here. This one, constrained and unconstrained dimensioning. So constrained dimensioning, it's quite simple and easy to use. There's a lot of options up the top here. You can do chains and things like that. But in its easiest mode, it's 1 click, 2 click, and then raise up for the 3rd click. You can see it's put a dimension on there of 70. Okay? So once again, 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks, and there's our dimension. And this is how I want you to do dimensioning, is just to follow that, do really nice, clear dimensions, everything will be okay. One of the most common mistakes that people make, and I'm going to click this exit button here, which will take me back to my page, is they'll go, oh yeah, I can do some dimensioning, easy, for sure. You ready? Here, look, James showed me, it's 1 click, 2 click, bam. And you'll notice that that number there is 140. What has happened here that is wrong? Firstly, this viewport here is 2 times larger than normal. So therefore, on this page, it does appear as 140 millimeters. That distance there is correct. It's about 1/3 of that A3 page. It's 140 millimeters. But in terms of scale of the object, it's incorrect. What happens when we actually double click on this viewport here is that it takes us inside that viewport and it accumulates its scale as well. The text sizes and things are relative to the page, but the scale within here is relative to the object. So obviously if this was a giant 1 kilometer park, for example, one of these little squares here might represent a couple of meters. Therefore, if we drew it on the page and say that's about 4 millimeters, which we know is incorrect, it's more like 4 or 5 meters. So double clicking is really important. It takes you into the scale of that viewport. Now the difference from the constrained and unconstrained is simply that constrained, when you go on an angle, for example if I wanted the diagonal distance from here to here, it constrains that to either a horizontal, as you can see here, or a vertical. It's just straight across in either of those axes. If you want to do a diagonal, use your unconstrained, and I'm just going to do a pretty crappy one here, which is across this diagonal here, which is 42, ironically, and that's okay. That's probably not how you dimension that. You'd do a leader line and things like that, and we can talk about those coming down the list here. Skipping over pretty much all of these because you can just read through them and kind of figure it out for yourself. Hyperlinks, some slope dimensions, and we'll get down here until we get to general notes. So general notes, this is a great feature that they've added in here. I'm going to just click to the right hand side of my page. It brings up this, the note manager. So if you've got a drawing and you need to put some warnings out for people, say there might be a rather large incline on one side, or that it needs handrails on the backing of the stage, or the curtains need to be 3.6 meters maximum because of this height limitation, something like that that's relevant to the drawing. What we can do is click in here to add, and we make it a note. Now you can see you can either give it a title of your own description, or it'll just take the first 42 characters of the note for itself. So in here, if I wanted to make a reminder and say, use the annotations layer for doing your dimensions, otherwise they'll be wrong. If I wanted that to be your reminder, and I put that in here, you can see there's the text note, and click OK. You can see it's made a nice little general notes for me, which I might like to stick down here on my drawing. Now notice I've done something wrong here. I haven't exited my viewport, so I'm actually going to cut that, jump out of the viewport, and I might actually paste that into here. That's a little bit better. I'm going to juggle this drawing around in a second to make everything fit. I'm just going to nudge those up out of the way for the time being. So there's a general note. You can copy and paste that, you can edit it, you can see there's some edit options under here and display stuff, all of which I'm sure you can adapt to quite readily. Now, jumping back in, I'm going to jump in on our right hand side here. Going to get into the annotations for that. So once again, I'd like a measurement on here. I'm going to do another constrained one. The text for me is on the wrong side. It doesn't really matter too much, but I'm going to use that flip text option there. And I'm also going to do an unconstrained just to show it off. 1, 2, 3. That's pretty cool. What I did want to show you was down here, the drawing label option. And it's really easy. I'm just going to click this in here. You can see we get a whole heap of stuff going on. That's okay. I'm going to click OK, and we're going to edit everything else later. Now what I've done, because it's clicked OK straight off, and I labeled all of my viewports, it's stolen some information from me. It said that this is currently drawing number 1, because I haven't placed any other markers yet in this drawing. It's also stolen the name of that viewport, 3D06 right, and it's also given me the scale automatically, which is kind of handy. All these options can be edited here. This drawing title, for example, the drawing number if I wanted to change that, numbering, styling, scaling, what kind of bubble that has, the text size, all that kind of stuff. But that's really handy for labeling up your drawings. You can see, I'll do it here again, double click, straight into annotations, grab my drawing label. I'm going to make sure I lock it to that, so I keep everything in line, looking very pretty. And there we go. Look at that. That's drawing number 2. And making sure I double click again in here, jump into that, drawing label, line it up. It's the most important thing is visually making it look appealing. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Look at that. It's instantly starting to look like someone actually wants to build this object. So all of these are pretty straightforward. The only two that we're going to talk about now is the VAA title block and the scale bar. Scale bar first. Let's jump into this one here. Remembering the scale bar, obviously we want it to be to scale, so we've got to be inside a annotations layer. Grab the scale bar. This one's going to be a little bit too big, that's okay. plonk that down there. If I hit OK, you can see what it would look like. 0.00 of a meter, but that's okay. I'm going to change this up a bit. I'm going to change the minor length to be 1 millimeter, and I'm just going to have 5 of those. And our major length is going to be 5 millimeters, and we're going to have yeah, that looks pretty good, 4 of those. Styling, let's mix it up and use the checker pattern, or maybe the flip pattern. Yeah, flip pattern, that's looking pretty good. Decheck this adjust units here, and you can see it's automatically chosen millimeters as my default. So now, even if I don't have a ruler, I've got a piece of string, I can hold it up and figure out how big these objects are. And I'm actually just going to move that down slightly here, just so it's away from the drawing. So that's looking quite professional. The last bit that makes everything look professional, and it's the biggest thing, that's why I'm leaving it right till the end, is the VAA title block. There's 2 options here. You can do a sheet border or a VAA title block. The sheet border was what we used up until around 2010 when we started to swap over to the VAA title block. So using the sheet border, just quickly, it's a simple left click on the page where you'll be presented with this, the sheet border preferences. Do you want it fit to page? Yes, please. Would you like a title block? Sure. Let's choose a Spotlight Simple one for this example. Going to hit OK, and there it has. Let's put it in there. Now things are getting a bit convoluted on my page, so let's play with a little bit of this. I'm going to grab all 3 of these, and I'm just going to drop their scale back. I really wanted to avoid, but we'll do a custom of 0.75. It's not really a scale you should ever use, but just in terms of this example, we're going to do it. Just going to reline these up as well. Make this back down to a 1 scale. And obviously I'm going to have to do something about these label positions. What I might do is swap this one and this one. Hang on, I'll be back in a sec. That's looking a little bit better now, so I've just juggled things around to make it a bit easier for myself. We can go back to looking here at the sheet border. So sheet border, the older style, if you're using a 2009, 2010-ish computer, you'll be using this style. You can see there's a fair few options here. The main ones that I want to look at are under the edit title and edit title block, and under the border settings as well. So let's look at the border settings. Generally I find all of the margins are too large, so sometimes I'll just think about taking some of them off. For example, the bottom one, I find that if I take the bottom one and the right one off, just make these slightly smaller, say an 8 and 8 on the left and the top. And you can also increase the zones if you're feeling like it. I sometimes find there's not enough, so I'll normally end up doing a kind of 9 by 15, 16, 14, whatever you're feeling. And obviously the grid size is probably a little bit big for me. I'm going to drop that back to a 10. So if I hit OK, you should lose that right and bottom. Everything should become smaller and the text should drop. Something like that. So that's looking a little bit better there. Also got this information in here that I'd like to fill in, so I'm going to double click on that. You can see it brings this up here, giving me easy access to a show name, so I can call this 3D Objects. The reference is lesson 2A, drawn by me, James Russell. Date today, it's the 7th, I believe, of the 4th, 13, and the CAD file name I'm just going to leave blank. Actually, just going to shorten that name up there. There we go, it's going to fit nicely. So you can see down here, that's changed now. 3D Objects, Lesson 2A, all of the details are filled in. And that's looking almost presentable, I would say. But let's just get rid of this and just have a look at the VAA title block and see what the difference is between the two. So, got my VAA title block here. I'm just going to double click on the page. Has a bit of a think about that, apparently. So it seems that my Vectorworks just had a small crash there. So just going to finish the rest of that up here. If we were looking for the VAA title block, it's right here. Left click, places it in there. We get a second one for rotation, so I'm going to just choose this way. I'm going to skip over all of this and hit OK. And you end up with something like that. If yours isn't locked to the page, you can hit this, snap to page position. You'll notice this particular style doesn't have a border in this case. You can add one in by editing the symbol, which I'll show you how to do later on when we talk about symbols. But just having a look here, you can see this one's got a lot more information. It does pick up a lot of things, and there's a lot of stuff here on the side, such as offsetting of borders, the page sizing, the scale factors. Choosing a base symbol is how you set this up here, so you can have a browse through some of the other options here. And we'll see if we can discuss making our own later on through that. But the main thing we want is just to double click on this and have a look at some of the other options in here. So there's a lot of information you can fill in. Sheet title, numbering, which is automatically picked up from up here where I've just made my new sheet. Drawn by, check by, some auto date stuff, scaling. This is important though up here, the project info, and filling this out, such as a number if you want to give your project a number, the name of the project, address and client and stuff, depending on what this has got written in here. The project info, when you click this button here, copy all this info to the other title blocks, will just fill out all of your sheets. So if you've got a whole wad of designs that you've done and you want to print them all with the same information, that's how you do it. We're going to have a look here also at one more thing, which is called the revision and issue journals. Mainly the revision journal for this instance, and we might see if we get to issue later on. But revisions is great if you have sent out a series of documents and then you need to revise them, let people know what you changed. For example, in this drawing, I could add in here that on the 7th of the 4th, which is today, by JR, created new sheet due to crash. There we go, and you'll see that'll pop up here. So issue A is on this date, and I created a new sheet due to the crash. There are several printing options that you can find under the VAA Revise Issue Print, and this menu here, feel free to explore it at some point. We don't quite have time to run through it now, but it is more advanced for doing batch printing than your regular print from here. So that's all we're going to do here for now. I'm going to leave you with an exercise for this. As always, I'll keep releasing videos to the solutions from the end of 2A. I'll do another batch of 10 for next week and have a go at this task now. In this exercise we're going to look at some geometric sculptural art. Mainly what I want you to do is go out and find a piece of artwork, either in your city or on the web, that you feel like you could create in 3D. Make sure it's a challenge to yourself, depending on your skill level. So some examples are shown as I'm talking through here, and what I want you to do is try and represent these as best you can in 3D with as much detail as possible. You should also be able to now create a front, side and top view taken from them as viewports and represented on a page, much like what I had going for me with my small object. Try where you can to work to scale and be as accurate as possible. As always, I'll post a solution video to something that I choose next week for you to have a look at, and we'll take it from there. Good luck!